So you wanted to hear more about my new palette, eh? Well, let me tell you, this is one of the most exciting, revolutionary, incredible choice of colors you have probably ever seen. Am I exaggerating? Well, of course I am. Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. You asked for it. I'm going to dig into this palette. It's a new palette I've been using. It's actually not new. I've had it for months. I kind of expanded on that micro palette that I did episode or a vlog on some months ago, and I will link to that right up there somewhere. And you can take a look because I have other information and more details about some of the colors, but I expanded on those 6 colors in that micro palette to make this 12 color palette, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. There were just some what to me were some very interesting choices and things that I wanted to try, experiment with, and I've painted with it a few times and kind of put it away for a few weeks, a month at a time, then got it out, painted with it a little more, put it away, got it out again, and I tell you, every time I throw a challenge at this palette, it seems to rise to the challenge. So I'm just finding, for me, it's just a very useful, versatile palette of colors. And while I'm not necessarily interested in having you pick these exact same colors, I think the choices may educate you or give you some ideas about how to use colors if you're not very familiar, or at least some choices that you hadn't thought of. So I want to dig into this palette, mostly because you requested it, but also I just think it's a really great palette and it's worth sharing. Oh, don't give me grief for exaggerating. You're the worst exaggerating I've ever seen. Well, let's see. You've told me you're an excellent dancer, excellent driver. You have the perfect golf swing. You know I hate golf. Shall I continue? I didn't think so. All right, so let's take a look at this palette. The first thing I want to do is address these 4 Primatex here from Daniel Smith. A lot of you have already asked me why those were there. They seem to replicate some of the hues that are already on the palette, and you're right, they do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I put these on this palette because I had extra space. These 4 Primatex were from a Daniel Smith Primatex sample set. They were 4 of my favorites, and I'd been looking for a place to put them. I had space here, so I just put them in there. Primatex granulate really well, so even if they duplicate some of the hues already on this palette, I thought it'd be nice to have them somewhere. I mean, I can always whip this palette out and augment any other palette I'm using. So I won't go into these, and there's no real rationale for including these colors with these other colors. If you're not familiar with Primatex, they're natural pigments that occur naturally in nature, usually like with stone or particular types of gems ground up and turned into a pigment. Like this is amethyst, for example, and this is jadeite. So anyway, that's just for those of you who may not know what Primatex are. Mainly, I wanted to talk about the other 12. This is my first mixed brand palette. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing mixed brand palettes. In fact, as an illustrator, I used to do it all the time. As a YouTuber who reviews paints, I prefer to keep them separated by brand, just so I can take out a palette, paint with it, know that I'm painting with the same brand in the whole palette, be able to assess its strengths and weaknesses, blah, 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 and report back on that. It's just too confusing to do that if I have a mixed palette. But I do, since I have several palettes and all of them are separated by brand name, I wanted to start doing some where I kind of combine some ultimate colors or colors I liked from various brands. So this may not be the last, but for now it is the first. Yeah, so this consists of 3 brands, Imgram, Daniel Smith, and Maimeriblu. And as I mentioned in my last video, so many of you were interested in, it was based on this little micro palette of these 6 colors, which I really thought long and hard about those. And so after doing this, and I liked the selection, I thought it'd be great to expand that, to double it to a 12 color palette. I really have not used this little micro palette much. The mixing area is too small. And since I was going for compactness, I haven't found a way to extend that I like yet. Several of you have offered suggestions. I have a couple ideas myself. Then I held off because I'm planning, I think, on duplicating this palette and this little micro palette here. This comes from Adventurous Art Supply on Etsy. It's got a bigger mixing area. It's very thin. It's not much bigger than this, and I think this will probably become my smallest palette. I don't know. I'm not getting rid of this. I may have a occasion to use it, but I am thinking of duplicating this palette and this little one for some very light plein air painting. So that's all on the side. Let's dig into these colors and why I like them. And I'll just go through them again. This is Daniel Smith Moonglow, M-Gram's Anthraquinone Blue, Daniel Smith's Cobalt Blue, M-Gram's Turquoise, M-Gram's Viridian, Daniel Smith's Apatite Green. That is a Primatech that I did want to include in here. We'll talk about why in a minute. M-Gram's Nickel Quinacridone Gold, M-Gram's Quinacridone Rust, Daniel Smith's Pyrrol Scarlet, M-Gram's Perylene Maroon, Maimeriblu's Magenta, and Maimeriblu's Permanent Violet Bluish. So let's take a look at Moonglow first. That's just my neutral tint, and I like it as a neutral tint. It reminds me some of M-Gram's neutral tint. You can see the violet, warm violet cast in there. You get the same thing in the Daniel Smith Moonglow, but they're slightly different. It's still a violet cast, but it's a little cooler than this. And again, it's just one of those things where I wanted to try it and see how I liked it, and I love it. Anthraquinone Blue, this is from M-Gram, and I included this on the micro palette because I was going for a very deep jewel tone type palette. I was looking for something dark and inky similar to Indigo. I also just wanted to test the theory that I could make a palette that did not include ultramarine blue. I thought, I'm just going to see what I can do. This serves very well in that capacity, and that brings me to the next color, which is Daniel Smith's Cobalt Blue. So these two blues fill the role very nicely for my main blues. You may be saying, why Daniel Smith Cobalt Blue and not M-Gram's? Daniel Smith's was a little lighter and brighter than M-Gram. Here's M-Gram's Cobalt Blue, which I like a lot. This just had a brighter, cleaner look to it, and just something I wanted to try. So because this blue was deeper, I thought they would complement each other very well. So after painting with this palette several times, I've not missed the inclusion of ultramarine blue at all. The next color on the palette over is M-Gram's Turquoise, and this fills sort of the, not sort of, it does fill the phthalo slot. It's made up of both phthalo blue and phthalo green. And so combining them in a turquoise is actually very useful for me. I mean, I can get, just adding a little bit to the cobalt blue, I can get a really nice cerulean for sky colors. It works great in what has been a spot on my palette in the past for Prussian blue. This fills that role nicely. I love making greens with Prussian blue. And while this is more intense, it does combine very well with the yellow that I have to make a variety of greens. So that was kind of neat. Then this green, I included this green. Viridian is sort of a phthalo green kind of color, but it does not have the intensity that phthalo green has. Plus it granulates, which phthalo green does not. So I love granulation as a landscape palette. And again, I've mainly designed this palette for landscape. Turns out it works really well for portraits. M-Gram's was the best Viridian I had. I actually bought it because the Daniel Smith Viridian I had was not very good. It was weak and sort of gluey and didn't flow very well. I liked this Viridian a lot better. So it's a nice green hue, and it doesn't really need to be in the phthalo category because I have that with the turquoise. So mixing greens, again, very versatile. Which brings me to my next green, and I love Daniel Smith's green Apatite Genuine. I mean, I really love this green. It's a very earthy sap green kind of color. It granulates very nicely, as a lot of the Primatechs do. There is also, you really can't see it here, but there's a little bit of a separation element where pigments separate into like a greenish and a blackish, brownish kind of elements which I think is cool. I mean, I love getting texture, variegation, and some pigment separation in washes when I do landscape. So I really wanted to include this on a palette, have for a while. And my yellow. This is probably the most confusing choice to a lot of you, and I had several questions about this. Nickel Quinacridone Gold is actually a combination of nickel azo yellow and quinacridone rust. And I have quinacridone rust on here, and a lot of people ask, well, why did you include this instead of PY150 or nickel azo yellow? You could have just combined the two. Well, it's mainly convenience. Take a look at the deeper, earthier mass tone compared to nickel azo yellow. I like this for being a ready to use, more all-purpose kind of an ochre color. Very bright, intense ochre color, but ochre color, and it gets me further down the road towards mixing a lot of different earth tones. But when tinted out, it is a very nice yellow. In very watery washes, it has very strong tinting strength. It's a fairly warm yellow, but it sits close enough to the warm cool line that I can mix greens or I can mix oranges with it. But for landscape, just a beautiful earthy gold yellow. And the main reason why I didn't put nickel azo yellow in there. And this is quinacridone rust. It was a color I'd never tried before my micro palette, so I wanted to try it. You can see it here compared to Mgram's red iron oxide. May not show that well on camera. This is a little less intense, a little redder. This is oranger and brighter. This granulates, semi-transparent. This is staining, does not granulate, and is very transparent. And again, this is one of my key colors. This and quinacridone gold, nickel quinacridone gold, are two very important colors in mixing earth tones for me. Next was Daniel Smith's Pyrrol Scarlet. I had this from a set, and it just adds another red that I didn't have on the micro palette. This is great for adding into the greens, since I have a number of greens and turquoise colors. Combines well with quinacridone gold to give me a pretty nice orange. It's kind of an earthy orange, but it's exactly what I love and need, for doing landscape or even portrait. And then this is probably the third color I think that is a key color for me in mixing earth tones. This Maroon Perylene from Mgram. Love this color. It's an alizarin crimson kind of a color. Maybe a little earthier than alizarin crimson. But with these three colors, quinacridone rust, quinacridone gold, and Perylene maroon, I can just mix a whole range of beautiful, beautiful earth tones. Very, very versatile. Perylene maroon mixes really well with violet to give you some great earthy violets. All of these do, actually. So, because violet can be a key component in mixing browns or earth tones. A very cool Magenta. Maimeriblu. I love Maimeriblu. I have only painted with it a few times, but I've always been impressed. It's a very clean, bright, cool, extremely cool red magenta. It's PB19, which on my Mgram palette is quinacridone rose. And just so you'll see that, here's Mgram's PB19. And this is a little redder. So I wanted something that was more truly in the magenta, cool red category. So that fills that slot really nicely. And lastly, Maimeriblu's Permanent Violet Bluish. Really nice blue violet. Really does interesting things to almost every color on this palette. I find it really interesting how much I use violet in landscape. I didn't used to, maybe going back 15 years ago. The more I use it, the more I want to use it. Just want to put some of these out here and talk about how they combine. It's really important in painting and landscape to have a great variety of greens and earth tones, I think. And so while these are my key base colors for earth tones, and these are going to be my key colors for greens, they cross-pollinate really, really well. Violet mixes well with any of these to do interesting things And the greens, it will kind of gray them and subdue them in neat ways. Turns these colors into more earthy violets or umberish colors. I mean, I would demonstrate, but it would be here for 2 hours for me showing you all the different possibilities. Okay, I'll put them all out here just so you can see them all on the swatch cards. Get a fuller look. This is the kind of thinking that goes into me making a palette. Maybe it'll give you some ideas for considering your own palette and how to construct palettes. And I really would urge you, if you like to use a lot of colors, it's still a good exercise maybe to take and construct a palette of just 12 colors. Even if you end up buying a ton of convenience colors and you don't really like to mix a lot, it's still worthwhile because with all the convenience colors in the world, you're going to want to augment them or shift them or bend them on the fly at some point. And it's just very valuable to know how to do that almost without having to think about it. It's just very helpful. It's very helpful to know how to construct a smaller palette. And really there are a lot of very good artists, very professional artists that don't use much more than 12. I use 12 color palettes in my paintings all the time. 18 is sort of my max. Actually, I'm planning on making a 20 and a 24 color palette. But of those colors that are on the palette, I will rarely use in any one painting more than maybe a half a dozen to 10, and the others are just there because the next painting may use a different 10. You know what I'm saying? All that just to say, know how to mix, know what colors do what. And one of the things that I like to do, I've mentioned in other videos, is a trip around the palette. I don't do mixing charts. You can if you want to, that's fine. I don't enjoy doing them. They don't really help me. What I like to do is what I call a trip around the palette. So I'll take one color and I'll just take and I'll do mixing with every single color in the palette. Then I'll go to the next color and I'll do the same thing. What'll it do with this? What'll it do with this? What'll it do with this? And just make mental notes. You can do that in a chart if you like. Mixing charts I don't think are helpful while you're actually painting. I think it's much better if you're just kind of practiced in mixing, and so when you need to add a color to a painting, you know, it immediately comes into mind, oh, well, I'll need to use this color and that color. That's really the kind of flexibility you want to have in the moment while you're painting. But if you like documenting them in mixing charts and you want to go to that trouble, that's fine. Regardless of how you want to do it, try a trip around the palette and mixing every color and every other color, maybe 2 or 3 colors, and see what you come up with. It a lot of times will surprise you and give you aha moments. It has for me. I hope that was a help. Thank you everybody. Thank you patrons for supporting and sponsoring this channel. We'll see everybody in the next video.